So, to continue our discussion on control flow, what if you wanted to repeat the same statements 1,000 times? Okay, well, one way is to just cut and paste that code 1,000 times in your code, but that can be really tedious, cause a lot of problems with maintenance, just be flat out annoying as a developer. Also, what if you wanted to repeat something a bunch of times, but make that bunch of times contingent on something in your data at runtime? Okay, well, that's where a for loop comes in. Okay, and a for loop can be defined this way. So you can say for, and then you specify a value, a variable, call one I, and then you specify a range in 1 -, and then you specify the braces, which tells you there's a block of code. So the idea is this will actually execute this block of code 100 times. Right? And so it's not being printed out here, but in the console it actually is. And so just in case you're curious, this right-hand side is for debugging purposes, but to actually view the console, which we haven't done yet, you go up to View, Assistant Editor, Show Assistant Editor. And this shows you what actually is being printed to the console, which is nice. So all those print line statements we've kind of been ignoring, we haven't had to look at them because the debugger has told us what they would show. But here, since it's not showing us that, we'll actually take a peek. And sure enough, it's running that. We'll trust that it's counting to 100 correctly. So, what else can you do with for statements? Well, they're actually much more powerful when you start to use the fact that you have this I value that's being updated. So what's going on is when you say for I in 1 through 100, not only is this print line going to get executed 100 times, but also each time through that loop, this I value will be different. First it'll be 1, then it'll be 2, then 3, then so on and so forth until it hits 100. So say you wanted to print out a times table or something. Then say you want to print out all the values of I times 2. Okay? You could do something like this. I times 2 is I times 2. And so if we spread this window out a little more, we'll see that it's actually giving us this partial times table really easily and elegantly. Another thing that we haven't talked about yet is that we can actually nest statements. Okay? And this is especially powerful when you have for loops. So if we wanted to actually print out an entire times table, not just the one for column 2, we can do this. So here we see that we're actually getting the full times table that you're used to seeing as a kid from 1 through 10. Okay? So it's really powerful stuff. We're generating this in only a few lines of code. And this is called a nested for loop. And you'll see this kind of paradigm very often in code. What's going on is first you hit this outer for loop that controls I. And then when you go inside that loop, well, there's another for loop. So each time I is equal to 1, for instance, J will actually get iterated through 10 times. And so that means this statement here actually gets called 100 times, 10 times 10, each time with a different value of I and j. Okay, this is a bit of a subtle concept, and I'm sure it may take a little bit of adjustment to get used to, but it pays for you to understand this example really well right now. For instance, what happens if you do different operations inside this outer loop and not just inside this inner loop? So it's something for you to play with and take a look at the console output, see if you can make some changes to this loop and predict what will happen. That will get you to be confident that you understand what this nested for loop really is doing. So now that we have for loops, another natural use of them is to iterate through collections, particularly arrays. So going back to our bank account example, where we have, say, an account number or account name and a net worth. Let's build that again. So say we have John, Jack, Louise. Okay, so, and you can imagine this array could be, thousands or millions of entries long. Say we get to a point in the code where we just want to iterate through this and print out a table of everybody's name and net worth. Well, that's really easy to do with for loops now, right? Because we can say for name, for I in name to worth dot count is the maximum, but we actually want to go from, so instead of from 1 to the count, we actually have to go from 0 to the count minus 1. And this is just because of the indexing, right? Because arrays are indexed with 0 as I. Then we want to say print line